Hello and welcome back to And That's a Fact, the channel where we take our subjective opinions and turn them into definitive, objective fact. I'm Neil Adamson.
And I'm Rick Papandrea.
And today we continue our breakdown and reveals for the winners of the first round of the non-MCU Marvel films within our Ultimate Comic Book Movie Bracket.
And we are excited.
Yes, these are, there's a lot of films in this bracket. There's 16 films in this bracket, but there were a lot of films that didn't make the cut. But most of those films that didn't make the cut, it makes sense that they didn't make the cut.
Like the Fantastic Four movies.
Yeah, none of those made it in.
Like Daredevil.
Daredevil, Elektra.
Punisher, Elektra,
Yeah. So, but what does end up making it through on this bracket is two of the three Blade movies. We get a whole slew of X-Men films. We get
and a bunch of Spider-Man.
And a bunch of Spider-Man films. So
and Hulk also.
And Ang Lee's Hulk. So we do get a pretty diverse thing, even though it is mostly X-Men and Spider-Man. Yeah. So we're excited about this bracket because this is all the films that aren't a part of the MCU that Marvel produced, that are Marvel properties. And eventually the winner of this bracket will be going up against the winner of the MCU.
So we find the best Marvel movie.
Yep, but we're going to start with these guys first. And our first match is the number 1 seed Logan against the number 16 seed, The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Yeah, this one, I'll be honest, it's pretty easy for me to choose. I obviously love Spider-Man. He's one of my favorite characters, and Wolverine, to be frank, isn't. I like him, and I love Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, but Spider-Man has always been one of my favorite characters. That being said, it's really easy for me to choose Logan in this one. I like Andrew Garfield, and I like the first Amazing Spider-Man a lot, but the second one just really fell apart in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of reasons for that.
I feel like what happened was you had a lot of studio interference in both of those films where the studio basically said, hey, we have X, Y, and Z characters that you need to put in this movie.
Yeah, and I think that is way bigger with Amazing Spider-Man 2. With Spider-Man 3, and I'll talk more about that when we get there, but I did not mind how many characters were in that, and I thought it worked, and I'll cover that. But with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, it was so obvious. And
just random at the very end, too. It was like...
Also, part of it is I'm more aware now, and I'm following the industry, and I read the trades. And so I know, they're trying to start a Sinister Six, universe, and everyone's trying to do universe building. And so, being more aware of that, I see it in the movie. But still, it didn't make any sense. And my biggest complaint about The Amazing Spider-Man 2 isn't the universe building, because I like that when it's done well. So I have nothing inherently against it. It isn't the weird portrayal of Electro, which, while it was weird, there was some cool parts. Like the electricity shooting and making the music, that was kind of cool. My biggest complaint is that they used the final shot of the movie in the trailer. Why? Why? You're doing something wrong if you find yourself cutting together a trailer and including the last shot of the movie. You've made a mistake.
Well, I feel like some of the things that are wrong with... to me, the biggest thing is a uneven tone between the villain and the hero. Because the villain is straight out of the Spider-Man TV show from the 90s. I mean, he is a cartoon villain. What Jamie Foxx did with Electro, that's totally fine, and we can talk about Spider-Man 3 in this regard too. If you go that route, that's okay. That works. It can work, even though it seems but the reason it seems that way is because the tone of the hero and all of the other world that they set up, especially in the first film, is not that.
And I liked a lot the look of Electro and the character of Electro. I didn't like the character of Max or whoever Electro's human version was. I didn't like that. Oh, and the other problem I have with it is, here's a spoiler for a movie that came out 6 years ago and a comic book that came out 40. It's the Green Goblin. The Green Goblin kills Gwen Stacy. And if a villain kills the character's girlfriend, he's the main villain. So it's a problem that they didn't introduce the Green Goblin until like 2/3 of the way through the movie. If there's a character that kills the main character's girlfriend, that's cool, man. I know Gwen Stacy dies. I've read the comics. But he should be the focus probably the whole movie, so it doesn't come totally out of left field.
Well, and that's where I say that it feels like the studio just like threw in, like they just wanted to check off this checklist of characters that they wanted to hit.
Yeah.
But
and like it's really cool that she was wearing the exact same clothes in the movie that she was wearing in the costume or in the comics. That was a cool touch, but it doesn't mean that there wasn't so much nonsense pouring down from the studio that made it onto the screen. It was just like, okay, well, like I see what you're doing, but you're doing it really badly. Like,
yeah.
And then,
so I think there's not too much more that we need to say about these two films because
we'll talk about Logan a lot, I imagine, because
Logan is going to be moving on as we expected. Amazing Spider-Man
sense.
2 loses to that, so Logan is 94% of the vote. Moving on to the next round, so we'll definitely be talking about Logan a lot more in the weeks to come. But Amazing Spider-Man 2 will be left behind, and I think it's completely fitting for that match.
Yeah,
so
that makes absolute sense.
So the movie that Logan will be going up against next week or this coming week is going to be the winner of our next match, and that is the number 8 seed X-Men versus the number 9 seed The Amazing Spider-Man. The first.
This is really the first Andrew Garfield one. This is really interesting to me because I think if you look at the movies kind of in a vacuum, they're both fine. They're 8 and 9 seed. That makes perfect sense to me. They're both fine. They're not bad. They're not amazing, pun intended. But they're both fine. The thing is, I give the lead to X-Men because The Amazing Spider-Man is a fine superhero movie that came out when everyone's making superhero movies.
And particularly, a lot of people are making good superhero movies.
Right.
What was it, 2010?
No, 11 or 12.
Okay, well, at that time, you still had DC doing the Dark Knight trilogy was finishing up, and Marvel's doing all the MCU
was getting
films.
Kicked off.
Yeah,
right. So releasing a fine superhero movie in the early teens is like, all right, well, good job. You participated, I guess. But X-Men came out in 2000, which was right after Batman and Robin. And so, like, X-Men is bridging a gap between the crazy camp fest of the 90s Batman movies and taking us to where we are now. X-Men, in my mind, is this major watershed mark for superhero movies.
Absolutely,
and without it, we would not have the superhero movie landscape that we have today. And so I think X-Men is vastly more important when it comes to a talk about superhero movies and comic book movies and how they're perceived by the public. And X-Men and another movie we'll talk about, the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man, I think kind of share this burden, but X-Men is first out of the gate. X-Men is the movie that puts Hugh Jackman in the role of Wolverine, and it wasn't supposed to be him originally. And we've got not only Hugh Jackman, who owns that role,
but Patrick Stewart
and Ian McKellen, two like Shakespeare caliber actors that are so good at acting the Queen made them knights. Like, they bring such gravitas and weight to these two characters, and they deserve it. I mean, if you don't know, the characters of Magneto and Professor X were originally conceived to be sort of mirrors of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Interestingly, Malcolm X is not Professor X, but Magneto. But so they deserve to be acted with like these amazing caliber actors with this crazy gravitas, and they bring such believability and weight to these characters that it doesn't matter that they're dressed in, you know, a crazy hat that covers your face and, you know, it's like, and doing
and again, like, some of those things, like, this was the era of, hey, we're gonna make comic book movies more believable, and so a lot of this stuff was very much based in the real world, and it was really the X-Men was the first time that we had seen a comic book movie that felt like it was a part of our real world. And then since then everyone has done that, or most of them have done that. So
and if they don't, it's very deliberate.
Yeah, so it very much started this trend, and you have to, like you're saying, you have to give it credit. When it comes to a match like this, these decisions that you guys are making, that you're voting on, one or the other, it's based on your preference. It's based on what film you think is better. But it's also, there's gonna come times like you just said, Rick, where these two movies, they're an 8 and a 9 seed and they're both fine, but something has to push one of them over the edge. And I think for most people, it is the fact that X-Men was such a groundbreaking moment. So X-Men does end up winning 88% of the vote. So X-Men will be moving on to face Logan in the next round, which I think
interesting. Both X-Men, I really like X-Men. I read that's one of the things in my pull list is X-Men Gold. I'm a big Nightcrawler fan. I think it's interesting about this X-Men too. Like originally, I said X-Men were allegorical for the civil rights movement, and then I don't know when the watershed moment in the comics is, but like this is the movie that really started making it more about the gay rights movement, which is interesting. And X-Men has always been about inequality, so I think that is really an important thing about the X-Men, and I think it's something that these recent movies do really well. Is kind of, highlighting that people are,
well, straight out of the gate with that film, they are talking about that inequality, and it is it's very clear what they're doing with it, and I think they go to a much less subtle hit you over the head with it in X-Men Last Stand. I think the way that they did it in the first film of that trilogy was perfect. It was the right amount of everything.
Right. Like any message, sometimes they can beat you over the head with it. And no one goes to X-Men movies wanting a sermon. And I think that I mean, in my opinion, a message in a movie is fine. A sermon in a movie is not. And so there is a balance. And I like X-Men. That's what they're about. That should be the message. But I don't want it to be a sermon. I want it to be there and be visible. But it shouldn't be like straight into cameras, people saying, this is the blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. So
I'm a writer.
So we have the bookends of Hugh Jackman as Wolverine moving
true.
on. His first film and his last film in the character, in the role. And meanwhile, the Andrew Garfield version of Spider-Man is being completely left behind, with both of those films, first and second one, being defeated in the first round. So, interesting. X-Men conquers Spider-Man in this case, but we'll see what happens next. So, our next match is X-Men First Class against Hulk, and this is Ang Lee's Hulk, starring Eric Bana.
Yeah. This one is so obvious to me. X-Men First Class is my favorite X-Men movie. Despite everything I just said about loving Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen, because I hadn't started reading the X-Men really at this point, and this came out in 2011, I think, we had heard now for a decade, and I had seen the X-Men movies, we had heard, Professor X and Magneto, they used to be friends. So it was so satisfying for me to go back and see them become friends, and see them as friends working together. And like the stylization of it, the period piece set in against the Cuban Missile Crisis, all of that. I love this movie. There's some of the best lines, I think, like just the killing Shaw will not bring you peace, and he doesn't disagree. Magneto says peace was never an option. Like just the two ideologies, like just coming against and battling it out, and I love that. Versus Hulk, which even when I was like 14 and this movie came out, I left the theater and I was like, that wasn't good. Like, and I was 14. I didn't know any better. I didn't have fully formed opinions, but I was like, man, that was something, you know.
It's interesting because when that movie came out, there was a lot to be said about it and what it was trying to do and how it was trying to push the boundaries. And you got to remember, this was this was right at that period that the X-Men movie we were just talking about had come out,
Right. So
and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man was out.
After X-Men, after Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, but before the sequels.
Yeah, I don't remember. I think it was 2010 or 2009. Or no, not 2009.
No, 3 or 4.
2000, like yeah. 2004, I believe.
Yeah.
Maybe it was 2003. But either way, it was right in that period where comic book movies were greatly improving and people were seeing the potential there. And this was basically them taking a character that they felt had never really been able to be done properly and giving it the same treatment that X-Men and Spider-Man had just been given.
It's easy to like make fun of this movie because of mediocre CGI and stuff, but there's a lot in there that doesn't suck and that is good, and
there was a heavy focus on this is a dark character, this is a deep, rich character, and we want to explore the character. Like, Ang Lee really tried to make this not about, like, explosions, and to make it about, like, a deep, emotional, like, relationship between him, like, and
I think it's properly, like, it's above Spider-Man 2. I will always give credit to a movie that takes a really difficult idea and they're like, no, we're going to go for it. We're going to make the leap and miss the leap rather than kind of cynically throwing everything in there and saying, oh no, everyone has to like this. We're going to put this bad guy and this bad guy. And, and so Ang Lee's Hulk, I don't think it's good, but I way prefer the ambition of it and this, oh no, we tried and maybe we failed, but that is way more preferable to me than a cynical, like, Spider-Man 2 kind of.
You know what I think is interesting is looking at the last match when we had X-Men versus Amazing Spider-Man. You had one film that came out at the birth of this period and did really well in its birth. And then another film that came out well into the new comic book movie era, and did not do very well. And this is kind of the flip side to me, the way I see it. Hulk came out in the birth and tried a lot of these things, and it didn't succeed. Whereas X-Men First Class is a representation of the refinement of the studio, having seen all of these films before it and doing it well, and really showing that they know what they're doing now.
Yeah. You're talking about the original X-Men and X-Men First Class. I was watching the bonus features for X-Men First Class because I'm a dork, and maybe you forgot, but in X-Men you see Eric as a young man, like not as a young man, as like an adolescent, being pulled away from his family at Auschwitz, and he's like reaching out, and the gates bend and everything, and they recreated that in First Class.
Yeah.
And not only did they recreate it so well that Bryan Singer, who directed the first one, was like, wait, where did you get that extra footage? Like, he didn't realize he knew they recreated parts of it because it's a different actor, but like they did it so well they confused the director of the X-Men of the first one. Yeah. And like that movie, I can't speak highly enough about it. It opens just with Magneto. It opens with like he's speaking 4 or 5 different languages in the first 10 minutes. And that scene in the bar in Argentina is so good. And there's so much,
my gosh,
like I the only thing I could think to compare it to is that scene in Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds.
The opening scene of Inglourious Basterds.
Yeah, the opening scene where it's all this slow build, slow tension build to violence, and it's just he walks in like, oh, you have beer. Oh, it's German beer. Tell me where you're from, and he just knows what he's doing the whole time, and is slowly.
It also reminds me of Kill Bill. Like
I actually have not seen Kill Bill.
Because Kill Bill is a revenge like film. So it's basically her going through and checking off all these people that wronged her and like basically killing them in the most elaborate and awesome ways possible. And that is exactly what's going on here. We are following Magneto through this journey that he's on. That it is just a revenge trip,
Yeah. That moment, when he tells them why he's there, and they're like, oh, my family were pig farmers, my family were tailors. What's your family? Oh, my family had no name. it was taken from them by pig farmers and tailors. And
yeah.
this, like, fear just across... That scene is so good.
Yeah. Fassbender is brilliant in that. He's brilliant in all of his portrayals of Magneto.
Yeah, we were talking about the iconography of Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even Apocalypse, which did not make this list, it was not top 16. And to me, it was sad because of that scene in the woods.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I saw that with a friend of mine, and she was like, "Oh, that family's gonna die," and I was like, "So hard. Like, this is gonna be a good scene."
Yeah. So anyway, it's no surprise X-Men First Class takes this one, 88% of the vote. So Ang Lee's Hulk stays behind. Unfortunately, that means no Hulk going into the second round because the Incredible Hulk in the MCU bracket didn't even make the top 16. So no representation from
Hulk
the
fans.
Big Green Monster. Yeah.
Although Ragnarok is there, I think Ragnarok counts as half the Hulk movie.
Yes, that's true. So, X-Men First Class will be going up against the winner of the next match, and that is the 4-seed Spider-Man versus the 13-seed X-Men The Last Stand.
Okay. I think Spider-Man wins. I'm hoping we'll talk more about it, but there's, like, I love this movie so much, and people might look back on it with, oh, it's campy or whatever, and, like, I know that the with great power comes great responsibility line has been parodied so much that, like, people are sick of it, but you can't blame the movie for that. And also, it's right out of, like, issue 1 of The Amazing Spider-Man.
Well,
like,
this is the thing, is that this movie, and really his whole trilogy, is a deliberate, like, that's what we talked about, like, with tone, right? Like, this is, everything that they do in this film is deliberate, and it's part of a universe that is self-contained. Like, there's no uneven tone, like you're not like thinking, oh, this is a dark, gritty world, and then you have these, like, funny moments.
The Punisher couldn't exist with the Sam Raimi Spider-Mans. Like, it would be incongruous.
And
like,
that's not to say that Raimi doesn't take these films to really deep, dark places.
Totally.
But he is very cognizant of a comic book world that he's created.
He knows that 10-year-olds are going to want to see this movie, and he makes a movie accessible to 10-year-olds. But also adults. Like, I can't speak highly enough about this movie. It is, like, perfect hero's journey. It perfectly encapsulates so much of what Spider-Man is. And, like, part of Spider-Man's thing is, second only to Captain America, Spider-Man is the most patriotic character in the Marvel canon. You know, he's always posing in front of American flags. And remember, this movie came out in May of 2002, so 9 months after 9/11. The rubble isn't clean yet. Like, and there's a moment, and to me, it was one of the most important moments, and I still remember it in the theater, when the Green Goblin is fighting Spider-Man, and all the New Yorkers, like, come together and they start throwing, like, garbage at the Green Goblin, and Spider-Man can, like, get away. And one of them says, "This is New York. You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us." And it was such a, like, empowering, emblematic moment of American, like, cohesiveness in that, like, immediately post-World War, or post-World War I, 9/11. Also, I mean, that was
way back. No, but you bring up
bit.
a good point, because that was a period, you know, we talked about yesterday, like, post and pre 9/11 and how our movie-going experiences changed, but right in the wake of 9/11, there was a very strong, you know, patriotic, unified sense of self in this country, and this is a film that totally, like,
embraces and runs with it. Like, and that movie ends with Spider-Man, like, hanging off of the flagpole of a massive American flag. Like, that's the final shot of the movie. And not only is that totally in keeping with Spider-Man, he's always hanging out by American flags. I think part of that is because he is the same colors, so artists probably like to draw him with the flag. It makes sense. They don't need to change their pencils. But it also is such a great, like, coming together of saying, oh no, this is the ideal of America. Spider-Man is the ideal of of what we can be in New York and America, and all of us have great power.
And it's also really interesting talking about what Spider-Man's motivation is, because this film makes it very clear. You know, it's funny because Homecoming basically says the same exact thing, but in a few more words to try to make it not as identical.
Right.
But Spider-Man's motivation is and always has been, like you said earlier, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think
if you can help and don't, it's your fault.
And I think this is one of the interesting things, because we're talking all about like the country and this unified, like patriotic, like moment for the country after 9/11 within this film. And it's really interesting because I think that is very much like the American mindset, like the patriotic mindset, which is America has the ability to help other countries. We should go in there and do that, which is exactly, you know, what got us into all the, you know, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. So it is very much in sync with Americans' mindsets in that time.
Yes, 100%. Absolutely. Like, I mean, yeah, I'm sure. Well, I'm sure it goes on, because The Last Stand it's not it's kind of one of those meh movies. It's fine. There's things in it that are good, maybe, but I don't think I've seen it since theaters. Like,
well, again, this is it's crazy because it's like the last film. Like, I'm gonna say in a franchise, because I don't want to say trilogy, because like Amazing Spider-Man only had 2 films. But obviously the X-Men franchise goes beyond this. But this was the bookend of the first part of the franchise. Right. And there seems to be this disease that happens in the end of the franchise, which is that the studio and it almost,
we got to get everything in there.
Yes, we got to throw everything that we possibly can in there, because this is our last chance to do it. So let's just get it all in there. Fan service, people will like it, you know.
Right.
All of these
the Juggernaut. Things. We need the Juggernaut in there. Why?
Yeah.
Well, we do.
Yeah. So just excessive. The film had a I would say a strong message, but not subtle. Hits you over the head with it. And then you've got a couple different storylines going on that you kind of feel like the first X-Men, the second X-Men, it was much more like they picked something and they stayed with it. This one kind of jumps all over the place. You got what's going on with, you know, Archangel, or I think he's just Angel actually in this one.
Yeah, he's Angel when he's got regular wings.
Yeah.
He's not Archangel until he has metal wings.
But you got all of these different things going on, and you know, the Brotherhood of Mutants, like
they're was recruiting just people, and it ends with a giant like shootout. Like, and the X-Men are
there are things about it that I like. I enjoy watching this film. It is something that like I can put on in the background, unlike Suicide Squad, and just kind of like enjoy having it on. You know, like there are certain scenes, there are certain moments that I think are really, you know, entertaining, but also deepen each character, because these characters continue this journey in films to come. Even like, you know, with what happens with Jean Grey. So like, you know, we see that at the end of X2, and then we see her in this new role in this one, and I think, you know, we dive into her backstory, and so this film has a lot to offer, but overall, it's just a little too much, and I think most people saw it that way too. So it gets knocked out. Spider-Man takes 82% of the vote. So Spider-Man will be moving on to face X-Men First Class in the next round. That's really
hard for me. That's going to be the hardest choice that I make in this whole quadrant of this whole bracket, part of the bracket.
Well, how about the next one, since you're such a Spider-Man 3 fan? So the next one we have is X-Men X2, X-Men United, a 6 seed, against Spider-Man 3 at the 11 seed.
I've seen X-Men 2. It's been a long time, though.
This is the one with Alkali Lake where Wolverine confronts Stryker and finds out about his past. But we get well, I guess she was supposed to be like an X-23 type of character, but I forget what what they actually designated her. But
I don't remember.
the girl with fingernails that were basically like Wolverine's claws, but they were on every finger.
Oh, I kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, for me, I think probably X2 will win because I think more people respect that movie. But I liked Spider-Man 3. A lot of people said, "Oh, there's too many villains." I remember that being the big complaint, but I didn't mind it. It felt very comic booky to me, and I thought that we needed, you needed the Venom and the Sandman to force the reconciliation between Peter and Harry, and because we had watched these characters, unlike in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, we had watched these characters be friends for 3 movies now. Their fight had much more emotional resonance than the other. And like, they did the symbiote story really quickly, and I know a lot of people don't like emo Spider-Man.
I think that right there is the biggest problem with this film. And I think what people... You said people don't hold it, people don't respect it as much. I completely agree. And it's because of how quickly they decided to throw the whole symbiote story in. And
Right.
like, it's just tacked on there. And it really needs, like, right now...
Oh, and Venom
it's getting
movie,
its
notice
own...
how we're saying symbiote and learn.
It's getting its own film. It's getting its own film with Tom Hardy. So,
Yeah, which
like,
actually
it deserves...
kinda good.
It deserves to be not a third string or a secondary thing going on in the background.
Sure,
It deserves
been
to be
given
front
more-
and center.
Yeah, I absolutely think it's the weakest of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. I just don't think it's as weak.
As people tend to give it. Yeah, I feel like
Yeah.
the emo scene too is like, I gave that a pass, even though
Yeah,
I
I mean-
totally see why people hate it. But
Yeah.
like, again, I give it a pass within the world that Sam Raimi created, but I think, again, the problem is that it's such a small part of this overall film because it's part of this symbiote story that is just tacked on. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, if that had been the whole focus of the film and we actually explored that, I don't want to say we spent more time with emo Peter, but like, if we explored what was going on there with him more
Right.
and just focused on that, I don't think as many people would be upset with that portrayal. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you know what's really cool about, like, I really like, too, and I don't think it gets enough praise, is the totally, like, silent scene where the Sandman is created. Like, that's a great scene. And, like, and again, it's so perfect to the comic book. Sandman always wears this weird, like, horizontal green on green stripes shirt. And that's what he's wearing in this movie. Like, it was really... They were taking panels from the comics and turning them into this Sam Raimi movie. And I like it. Again, it's because they tried to do it very earnestly. I kind of give them more of a pass than being very cynical about it.
Well,
I wouldn't be surprised.
It was
if
Sam
X2
Raimi trying to stay doing what he had been doing, what he had established, the world that he had created, staying with the tone that he felt that he was ushering. I think that, we talked about it earlier too. I think there was studio interference in this one that definitely hurt the film. But I don't disagree that this was, again, a more earnest attempt. I just think it had less complete, like, creator and director control than, the films before it. And
we haven't talked about with the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies yet, too, is how perfect, like, all of the casting is. Like, I was just going to say, I liked Tobey Maguire as Eddie Brock. I thought that it worked. And J. Jonah Jameson as oh my gosh, I'm totally spacing on that actor. What's his name? He's also in the Allstate commercials.
No,
he's perfect.
It's Farmers.
Like,
it's Farmers Insurance.
Farmers,
And
that's
he's
what it is.
also
Excuse me.
Commissioner Gordon. Oh gosh.
Yeah, sure. For like 10 minutes.
Anyway,
They
who
could
we're talking
cast
about.
him in the next Spider-Man movie, as J. Jonah Jameson, and I wouldn't blink an eye. I'd be like, "Yep, perfect. Don't say anything about it. He's still J. Jonah Jameson. We don't even need to talk about it. Like he's perfect in that role."
J.K. Simmons.
J.K. Simmons. That's his name.
Yeah. So anyway,
also,
yeah, I disagree with you on the casting of Topher Grace.
I get that. That's fine. But it worked for me.
They totally screwed up the symbiote storyline. Like this was the biggest problem with the film. I feel like that was the biggest issue. I know
Eddie Brock is supposed to be like this big muscly guy like Tom Hardy, but I liked them paralleling him with Peter, Tobey Maguire, and now Eric Foreman are both like smaller guys. I like the parallel there. I thought that worked. But whatever. I was like a kid when it came out, and I haven't rewatched it because I'm afraid to. So, if we're being honest,
as expected, as both of us predicted, X2 moves on. Spider-Man 3 gets left behind. X-Men 2 gets 83% of the vote in this match. So that means it will be moving on to face the winner of our next match, which is X-Men Days of Future Past and Blade 2.
So this is I haven't seen either of the Blade movies. They're the only two movies on this list I haven't seen. So it's hard for me to, but I'm going to guess that X-Men Days of Future Past moves on because Blade is from the 90s. Days of Future Past is way more recent. I think more people know it. I think that X-Men generally has more love than the Blade movies. Even though I know people have forgotten the Blade movies because they were like, oh, Black Panther is the first major superhero movie with a person of color in the lead, which totally forgets about the Blade movies.
Well, yeah, I feel like that's kind of splitting hairs, though, because usually what you're talking about with Black Panther is like, okay, this is a PG or PG-13 film. The Blade films were rated R. And, like, you could be splitting hairs about what you mean by superhero, because, like, Blade, it's a comic book, and and this
hunts vampires. That's heroic.
This is why we did comic book movie bracket and not superhero bracket, because there is a lot of argument to be made about what qualifies someone as a superhero.
Right.
And I believe that there are definitely people out there who would say a daywalking vampire is not a superhero, right. They're a vampire. Like, that's a different genre, it's a different kind of character.
Yeah.
And so
and by his own admission, Deadpool is also not a superhero. And we couldn't do this without Deadpool. So, like, comic book movies are what we're talking about. But I see what you're saying about splitting hairs. But all that to say, I still think that Blade is significantly more forgotten than Days of Future Past. So I think the lead goes to Days of Future Past.
Yeah, I think this one was a case of you're going to have people, like, I remember when those movies came out, like, my neighbors were huge Blade fans. Like, huge Blade fans. And so, like, all of my knowledge, really, for Blade came from them, because I hadn't heard of the comics or anything like that, and they had, like, everything. So, that's when I really, like, started to explore this character and get to know this character and get to know these movies and the comics and everything. And I think that it is a total niche character. Like, this is you have people that are just diehard into, like, one, like, franchise or one comic or one character, and that is what Blade is. Like, the people who like Blade are totally into Blade. Like,
right.
But you don't find, you don't find much of a happy medium. Like,
there are no casual Blade fans. Either you haven't seen it or you love it.
Exactly. So I think that the people that come out and vote for Blade are going to be the ones who absolutely love it. But, it's a matter of X-Men Days of Future Past is a much more well-known film because it's featuring these characters that at that point in the franchise there were 5-6 films in, and you've got Wolverine. You still got Hugh Jackman, you got Ian McKellen,
right.
you got Patrick Stewart.
This is the movie that brought them all together. Like, this is the movie where Patrick Stewart and James McAvoy have a scene together as young and old Professor X. Like, everyone who liked any of the X-Men movies is going to want to go and see this and will probably like this movie. You know, I've totally just spaced her name. Is Storm is back. They're introducing
Halle
new
Berry's
characters.
back. Yeah, and then you got Anna Paquin, who at the time was at the height of her True Blood, you know.
Yep.
Like, and there was the whole road cut with that. So I think it's no surprise to me that Days of Future Past moves on, takes 78% of the vote, and will be moving on to the next round to face X-Men.
X2. So it's going to be X-Men versus X-Men. I think this goes to Days of Future Past easily. I think that X2 is a fine entry to the X-Men franchise overall, but I think Days of Future Past being more recent and being the one that sort of bridged the gap and reset the continuity that so many people didn't like from The Last Stand, particularly like with the death of Jean Grey and the poorly done Phoenix saga. I think that this goes to Days of Future Past pretty easily, but I guess we'll find out.
You know,
what about you? What do you think?
It's hard to really predict the next one because X2 was, you know, it's kind of, there's that trend. Like, the first one's good, the second one's better, and the third one's not as good as either, right? Like, that's the trend of the trilogy, usually. And
generally, I mean, you know, they do that kind of like with Spider-Man, people could argue, and even like the original Star Wars trilogy.
There's a lot of, now, we don't always necessarily agree with those, like the Dark Knight trilogy. We don't always agree with
or
them,
the Indiana Jones trilogy.
But that tends to be, you know, a common consensus, and I think X2 is definitely probably the strongest film within those first three.
But I think those first three are weaker than the newer ones.
Yeah, well, and the newer ones had a lot more that they were able to stand on top of, like, from what came before.
They were important for building groundwork, but I think, you know.
Yeah, I think Days of Future Past is much more complex. Like,
X2 is what introduced Nightcrawler, though, isn't it?
Yes. And
See, I loved that's where I started.
I feel like X2 is much more like a personal movie.
Yeah.
Like, it gets down to the character in a much more personal sense. It's not about, like, grand scheme of things. Like, Days of Future Past is dealing with, like, the future of the universe, basically.
Right.
Like, they're
everyone is
the time-space continuum, going back in time, trying to alter the entire future of the world. So, like, it's basically, like, personal demons versus, like, world-changing events.
Peter Dinklage's Trask, I thought, was awesome, and he did such a great job. I mean, like, they never talk about this, but he talks about how much he hates mutants. Well, dwarfism is a mutation. And so, like, having the bad guy hate something about himself and project that on the way that they did that, I thought was so well done and nuanced that I really love his portrayal of Trask. But I also, I mean, Nightcrawler is one of my favorite characters in all of Marvel, top 5. And part of that is because I like swashbuckling, you know, pirates. But this is the movie that introduced me to him, was X2. So it's hard for me. I think it goes to Days of Future Past, but X2 still certainly is a contender.
Yeah, I think, you know, like we said before, going into the next round, there's going to be a lot closer matches, and I think this is going to be one of them. I think this one will be harder for most people, and it's going to probably be a close match. So
they're the seconds. I just realized it's the second of the first trilogy and the second of the second trilogy.
Yeah, I guess Apocalypse is the third, right?
Yeah.
So, and again, if we following the trend of the third one not being very good, Apocalypse,
which they even say in Apocalypse.
So, all right. So moving on to our last two matches, we have the number 7 seed Deadpool against the number 10 seed The Wolverine. Now, this is not Wolverine Origins. That film did not make the list. It never deserved to make the list.
No.
So
this is the one that takes place in Japan.
And again, if you guys are curious as to how these films got seeded, we haven't really been explaining it in every single video. So, if you're curious how these films got seeded, it's based off of Rotten Tomatoes critic scores, and how we broke it all down, if you want to know how we did that, you can watch our preview video, which is on our channel too, because that goes into all of this stuff. But as it stands, Deadpool's number 7, The Wolverine is number 10. Not too far apart from one another.
No, they're pretty close. I mean, I think, so obviously Deadpool is intended to be comedic. It's parody and satire, and it does it really, really well. Wolverine isn't. Wolverine is a very different kind of story. It is an X-Men movie without really any X-Men, just Wolverine. And I really liked it. I thought that it was good until, again, it kind of suffers from the same thing as Wonder Woman. The third act.
Yeah.
Like, it was up until the third act, it was like really stylistic and beautifully shot and everything. And then it turns into Wolverine fighting a giant metal samurai, which, again, is a comic book thing, but...
And it is visually, like, the imagery is pretty badass. Like, you
can't
deny that. But based on what
it didn't feel in keeping with the rest of the tone of the movie.
Exactly. The first 2 acts of the film were really, really... like, it was a much more serious film. Like, you really got into the mind of the character. And then... at the end, it's just like... It
makes a really good predecessor for Logan, I think, only accepting a little bit of that third act. Yes. And spoilers for the Wolverine and Logan, something that I loved, that Logan, it really is, this is Logan that really kind of was able to do this, but in the Wolverine, the girl character, whose name I don't remember because I've only seen it once, she predicts Logan's death. And she says, "I see you lying in a pool of your own blood, holding your heart in your hand." And then they fulfill that prophecy in Logan because he's holding on to Laura's hand. And like those 2 movies together, I think work so well. And so I really like Wolverine, and I think that people are gonna choose Deadpool because it's funnier, because it doesn't have a muddled tone. The tone is all sarcastic. And because Ryan Reynolds is one of the most charismatic humans to ever have lived.
Yes, he is.
And so I think Deadpool will probably win. I really think the Wolverine is kind of underrated in this.
I agree.
In general. So if you haven't seen it, see it. Like,
I think actually that it makes sense where these 2 are seated because they're not far from each other and they're kind of right in the middle of the bracket. And I think both of them kind of deserve that. Like, I think sometimes people... I feel like sometimes people hype up Deadpool too much. Like, they think it's much better than it is. And I think a 7 seed is very fine for that. I think that's...
I agree.
That's really what it deserves. It's not an amazing... Like, it is hilarious. It is funny. Ryan, Ryan Reynolds is...
Deadpool. He is Deadpool.
This character to life in every way
Deadpool
imaginable.
As much as Hugh Jackman is Wolverine or Chris Evans is Captain America. Like,
and
the problem... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's just like these are 2 characters that like the actors like totally embody the character. And so like in both of these films, like you're looking at them and it's like, man, you can't knock either portrayal. Each portrayal is like which one is better than the other, and I think Deadpool probably gets the edge in most people's minds, but I don't think it should be a huge edge, as it is in what our voting turned out to be, which was 89% going to Deadpool.
Wow. That really doesn't surprise me too much.
By that.
And part of me, part of me is a contrarian, so it's like, everyone loves Deadpool. Wolverine should have won, but Deadpool deserved to win. I really liked the movie Deadpool. Yeah. The problem is I don't really like the character of Deadpool. Nothing against him. He's just never going to be one of my favorites because at the end of Deadpool, when Colossus is giving that speech about heroism, he's like, this is what heroes do and we don't blah. I find myself agreeing with Colossus. And then, of course, they undercut that moment because Deadpool shoots the guy. He's like, yeah, but I'm no hero, blah, blah, blah. And... I agree with Colossus. Like, I enjoyed the movie Deadpool, but he's never going to be my favorite character or anything. But it doesn't surprise me that it moves on. Like, it would have surprised me if it didn't move on, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think going back to what we said the other day about the mask, like this was like Deadpool and the Mask are so incredibly similar. They're both like irreverent like characters that are just out of control, and I don't think people. I feel like people think Deadpool is more original than it is, and I think that's why people constantly give it like this pass, right? I think I think the majority of people who saw the Wolverine, Deadpool maybe is better, but only by a little bit, and so they end up voting for Deadpool. And I think that's why we have such a huge gap of like 89% win by Deadpool, because everyone, you know, the people who like both, like, it was just a little bit to Deadpool, you know?
Right.
And that's what ends up happening. So
and
Deadpool
I think I voted for Wolverine, actually. But I was just like a little bit to Wolverine. So Deadpool, it's great. It deserves the win, and it will go on. But see Wolverine if you haven't. It's good.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
it's like, who doesn't want to see Wolverine fighting with a katana?
The train sequence is absolutely amazing. Yeah. Even if you don't see anything else, watch the train sequence from the Wolverine. It's really, really good. All right, so Deadpool will be moving on to face the winner of our next and last match, and that is the number 2 seed, Spider-Man 2, against the number 15 seed, Blade.
Now, having not seen Blade, it's hard for me to say this, but not so hard that I'm not going to. Spider-Man 2 wins easily. Like, it's a 2 seed versus a 15. Again, we saw Blade lost a future past. I think a lot of people don't remember Blade. And Spider-Man 2 is constantly listed as one of the best superhero movies ever made. There's so much about it that's great. And, you know, the mechanical arms, they did part CG and part puppets. And let's not forget Joel McHale's role as bank teller or manager. So I think Spider-Man 2 deserves to move on.
Yeah, I think Spider-Man 2 was cause when did it come out? 2004? Was it 04?
Yes, 4 or 5.
Okay,
because the first one was in 2002, so yeah, 4 or 5.
I remember when this film came out, I got the DVD that had the special features on it, and I remember watching those special features. This was like, to me, this was like the golden age of behind the scenes.
Yes,
you know what I mean.
Yes,
like
2005 to 2008,
where they started opening the doors to like, this is how the sausage is made. Like on all these different DVDs, like the bonus features.
And for film dorks like
so
us,
rich. And I remember watching the bonus features to this over and over and over and over again, because I was so fascinated by how they brought this world to life, how they brought these characters to life, and so much of what they had done on the film was like, hey, we've never done this before. This is groundbreaking. Technically and artistically. Like, this film was just doing everything that it absolutely could to just break down barriers and get you excited about this genre and get you excited about these characters and make you invested in comic book movies. Like, if X-Men kicked it off, like, this one, like, started sprinting. You know?
Right.
Like, this was when you knew that we were in a period, you know, I would say Renaissance, but we never really had a huge period before it. But
well, I mean, you've got the Superman movies and stuff, but like, this is what
they were very spread out. Like,
if X-Men opened the door for the golden age of superhero movies that we're in, this is the movie that was the mark. You know what I mean? Like, this is the first of the golden age of superhero. You know, like, so without it, we wouldn't have the Chris Nolan
going
Batman
up against
movies.
the movie like Blade. You know, we talked about Blade 2 and that niche like group, and it's like you're not going to be able to compete. Like, Blade, like, there's a reason this is a 2 seed versus a 15 seed. Like, we had an upset in our independent bracket, like with the 2 and a 15. Where Wanted beat out A History of Violence, I believe.
Yes.
This is not that case. This is the situation where it is very clear which one comes out the champion of this match, and that is Superman 2. 88% of the vote.
Wow.
Makes complete sense. Totally deserves to go on, but it will be going on to face Deadpool in the next round. Now,
That
personally,
is tough.
I think it's tough. I think personally, I go Superman 2 every single day.
Spider-Man 2.
Or Spider-Man 2. I don't know why.
Yeah, I agree. I also choose Spider-Man 2 over Deadpool.
But during the voting of this coming round, Deadpool 2 will be coming out in theaters.
Oh, that's true, man. So I mean, like, it's going to be hard for me.
Big push.
Yeah. So make sure you guys vote in this, but it's going to be hard for me because I think Deadpool will probably win. That wouldn't surprise me. Spider-Man 2 is kind of outside of people's minds because it was so long ago, and we've had 2 different Spider-Man actors since then. But I think Spider-Man 2 deserves the win. I think it's a way better movie.
Arguably the best superhero film of all time.
Yeah. I mean, like, honestly, this bracket, in my opinion, should really come down to, like, Logan and Spider-Man 2.
Which are the 1 and the 2 seeds, which makes sense. Like,
right. And it should, and I don't think it will, unfortunately. And it's not like I'm against comedy, but I think that we're so cynical as a culture, and Deadpool comes out of that. Deadpool is satire and parody, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a place for earnestness, and Spider-Man is like Wonder Woman in that it is wholly and unapologetically earnest.
Yes.
And I think, unfortunately, that's going to work against it, and it makes me so sad that it's going to work against it.
I'm really going to be pulling for it in the next round.
Me too. But
you know what I think is really interesting to take away from this? I mean, going into the next round, really, because you got to consider Deadpool, X-Men. It's
right.
This was always we had Blade, we had Hulk in this, but this was always going to be X-Men versus Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And that's really what we see in the next round. It's only X-Men and Spider-Man films, but
Logan versus
predominantly X-Men films.
Yeah.
X-Men really dominated this entire first round, but
only
they also
2
have
Spider-Man
a lot
moves,
more films.
Yeah, that's true. They have a lot more, and of the Spider-Man films, particularly like Amazings, they're just not as good, and so they don't deserve to move on.
Yep.
But Spider-Man 1 and 2 definitely deserve to move on. I'm going to be really bummed if they're both out in the next round, though, because Spider-Man is one of, like Nightcrawler, one of my very favorite characters. And going up against First Class, that's really hard for me to choose because I love First Class.
Yeah.
But going up against Deadpool, that's going to be even harder for me because I don't love Deadpool.
You know what I think we might see happen is that people will want to vote for Deadpool. So even though Spider-Man 2 is a better film than Spider-Man, I could see people, instead of giving their vote to First Class, giving their vote to Spider-Man just because they won't give it to Spider-Man 2 because they want to give it to Deadpool. As a vote,
not for Spider-Man the movie, but for Spider-Man the character.
Yeah, exactly. I could see that happen. I don't know if it's going to happen.
I could see that happening too. I think that Spider-Man probably will beat First Class, to be honest. But I think that Deadpool will beat Spider-Man 2, even though it should probably be flipped.
Yeah, so... But that's up to you guys. You guys are the deciders of what happens next. You know now who's moving on to this second round, and you are going to determine who moves on past that. So we need you to get involved and to vote, and make sure you're liking and subscribing to our channel.
Follow all the links below. We have an Instagram. I don't know if we've posted anything on there, but we have it. We have Twitter. There's a Facebook group. And leave comments. If you were like, you idiots need to rewatch Blade because it's awesome, tell us. Call us idiots. That's fine. We can handle it. We'll just cry. And like I said, vote, please, because otherwise it's just us. Yeah. What else, Neil?
I think that's pretty much it. I know for you guys when you're watching this, it's probably not morning, and at this point it's probably not morning either. But
no, it is for me still.
Yeah, it's still for you. But we kind of stumbled through this one because we both woke up after shooting late last night and editing and working on stuff. So this was a little rough of a breakdown, but you guys got all the answers, you got all the information that you needed, and hopefully you enjoyed some of our analysis. And going into our next video.
Yeah,
we'll be
these are the
diving
best
into
films
MCU.
of round one. The best Marvel movies that weren't produced by Disney going into the next round. And we're going to find out what's best. But these are the best so far. And that's a fact.